Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. It's your incredibly lazy host, Street Urchin again. Unfortunately, I will not be releasing a skit video this week. I was looking through all the ones that I was making, or the ones that I had made, and I thought they're just not funny enough. They're not at the quality that I would want to put onto my channel. My usual excuse is that I'm lazy, but in this particular case, I have a grandfather in hospice, and I've got a lot of family coming in and out. So things have been going a little bit more slowly than it normally would be. So instead I thought I might share my MBTI journey these past 10 years, what it's done for me, what I had to do to learn more about it. Long before MBTI, I had taken a keen interest in understanding people, mainly in their motivations for things. Over time, learning the patterns in behavior, a twirl of the hair, a quick scowl, I would learn that often it's the little things in people's behavior that would predict what actions they were going to take next. I grew up in a rather volatile household, and so I took a keen interest in making sure that I did whatever I could do to limit the negative interactions that I would have with others. Unfortunately, most of the negative interactions I had was caused by not doing well in school. I did tests and classwork just fine, but the amount of homework that they wish to send with me. If you have a lead preference for extroverted intuition, you'll find that focusing on such tedious tasks, it's darn near impossible, at least without some form of medication, which I was never given. Regardless of how negative the impacts were, I still could not focus my mind into completing these homework assignments, which would lead to very substandard grades. And although it was a rather miserable experience for the 15 years of my life, it taught me a lot when it comes to knowing when people are lying, when they're being fake, and the importance of withholding information. Point being, I grew up with a mind towards manipulating human behaviors. And I know that manipulation has a rather negative connotation. I simply mean influencing the dynamic that I have with other people so that it is more in a neutral space, or perhaps a more positive space. And for all of those years up until I was around 25, I had been very successful in getting people to do the things I needed them to do, predicting their behaviors or their actions, determining which approaches I needed to be taking to have a more favorable outcome. I often tell people that I would not be alive today if it were not for my understanding of human behavior. I would be living in a box under a bridge someplace in Milwaukee, and thankfully that's not the case. And up until this point, I have heard of a great many other typologies. Everyone is familiar with astrology, of course. There were some pickup artist typologies that at first seemed interesting, but I found them to be too basic and wanted to implement more of this shotgun approach to picking up people. Although the one I found most interesting was a small book called Pandora's Box. That one I found to be a bit more insightful than others. And of course I found them to be vaguely interesting, but I paid them no real mind, as up to this point I was secure and certain in how I dealt with people. I didn't need someone to come along and try to explain to me how other humans worked. But one day I had a friend who was taking a psychology class. He recommended that I should take an MBTI test. I, being the more curious sort, figured that he wouldn't send me this unless there was some kind of interesting nuance to it. So I took the test. I don't remember what website it was, and it spit out to me ENTP. So understandably, I found whatever information I could regarding the ENTP personality. And the first one I found, once again, I don't remember the website, was so eerily accurate to my life in general that I figured it could not be simply coincidence, which sparked my interest. And of course, I began my journey into understanding MBTI. I needed to know if this was just a fluke or if this was a system in which I could, in fact, categorize other people. For the first month, I went everywhere except an official source for this information because I didn't know that it existed. So I went to Reddit, or I went to, of course, I've complained about this a lot. I went to a lot of Facebook groups. I read sources from third parties, random articles. Towards the end of the month, I found that that there was no consistent information whatsoever. It seemed as if everyone had their own personal understanding of the MBTI system. The two people claimed to be the same personalities, and yet they acted completely different. I eventually came to the conclusion that most people were just treating this as some form of astrology, except it had the added benefit of you just deciding to identify as a particular personality. You didn't need any evidence. You didn't need to apply critical thinking. Just say you're this type and behave like you normally do, and people are just supposed to accept it. Understandably, it was a bit of a frustrating time when trying to learn MBTI, and just when I was considering that it probably wasn't worth my time to delve into it any further, I accidentally stumbled upon the MBTI website, Myers-Briggs.org. And lo and behold, a few clicks later, there was the whole list of the cognitive function definitions. And after reading those definitions came a renewed interest in MBTI, because at this point I had 25 years experience dealing with people, understanding them, manipulating them for positive gains, and I was shocked to see these definitions fit so well with my understanding of people. Introverted sensing was about memory and the reliance upon it. Extroverted thinking was about finding what most people agreed was the logical course of action. Introverted feeling being about personal values and finding congruency between actions and thoughts and how someone felt about things. And so I found that MBTI wasn't going to change how I understood people, but it instead gave me these tools, these terminologies, so that I could better categorize the behaviors I was noticing. And so for me, I don't know how many of you would relate to this, but to me, it was like playing a game again, a game you've already played before, going through a story, except now you've got mods that change the way in which you see the game. So life became a lot more interesting to me in terms of my interactions with others. And as I've mentioned on numerous occasions, I then spent a great deal of time traveling state to state, town to town, trying to find out how often these cognitive functions manifest themselves in people's behavior, working on having a practical understanding of the MBTI theory. And I was always keeping an eye out for what I call the extremes of function use. What does it look like when someone has a particular function in the very first position? How hard are they relying on this function? And that, of course, took many years of studying a great many number of people until I believed that I had seen the extremes of that function use. If we take extroverted feeling, for example, what does that look like when it's in the lead position? Overly concerned about the comings and goings in a particular group, whether everyone's getting along or not, even to the point of excising certain elements from the group, manipulating others into believing their future plans for the social setting is best, establishing a hierarchy. And when someone gets out of line, the lead extroverted feeler may put them down or put them back in their place, which of course is behavior that you typically find in, let's say, a high school cheerleader. And what do the extremes of extroverted thinking look like? Always desiring a consensus of logic amongst the group, finding the most accredited information available, studying how others found success so that they might get it, and then of course having big problems with it when someone disagrees with or says something contradictory to the information that they have gathered from books, other sources, etc. This is, of course, why I explain to people that it's great if you want to listen to what I have to say on the matter of MBTI and how you can use it practically. But I always suggest that you go out there and find out for yourself. Find those extremes so that you have a better perspective, a more complete framework to have when trying to type other people, because everyone uses every function every day. Just so that you don't make the mistake of seeing a person do something introverted feeling related one time, and you don't automatically assume, okay, well, they expressed an introverted feel, therefore they must have it in the first, maybe second position. You're looking for aggregate behavior over time, and without seeing those extremes, you're not going to be entirely sure where to put that function, which of course is the main problem that we have in the MBTI community today. There's a lot of contradicting information, a lot of misinformation, and obviously no one's going to take the time out to really research the subject, go out, do it yourself, take your own notes, do your own experiments. As a quick example, many of the, in quote, ENTPs that I met, many were ESFPs, many were ESTJs, an ESFJ, and oftentimes it's not really their fault necessarily. They take the information that was given to them and then work with it, not knowing whether or not the information they even got was correct, which leads to misconceptions, incorrect stereotypes. In fact, it wasn't until 5 years into MBTI that I believed I had an actual concrete understanding of this theory, which, as you might imagine, required extensive levels of experiments and testing just to make sure that I had it down. I found, for example, that people with a stronger preference for introverted sensing generally lead normal lives, as is normal based on how they grew up, where they grew up, the cultures they're in. Many introverted sensors nowadays here in the United States, they go to school, they do well in school, oftentimes go to college and then graduate from college, then eventually pick up very regular jobs or the jobs that their parents had. However, the same could be said for an ISTJ that grows up in a not so great neighborhood where they're told the best way to survive is to steal things or deal drugs, and that being arrested by the police is a badge of honor rather than something that could potentially destroy your life. And although we think of living a normal life as obviously it's boring, it's mundane, it may not be all that interesting, you will find that in your own studies of MBTI, you'll find that introverted sensing is incredibly important to civilization as a whole, furthering my belief that every function has a proper place at a proper time. It was after about the 5-year mark that I tried to start up a YouTube channel those years ago. I made a few MBTI videos, but life circumstance was simply not having that. I was unfortunately no longer able to put any more effort into those videos. And it wasn't until many years later that I had another opportunity to start it up again, which I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. Granted, I may decide to branch out from MBTI and talk about other things just to have a more versatile YouTube channel, possibly create new ones. But yes, it's now been over 10 years into MBTI. And if you haven't heard me mention this before, once you get into this MBTI stuff and you go out there, you use it, you see the correlations between how you're typing people and the general theme of the frequency charts. When you start getting more evidence that you're on the right track, it's, at least for me, I assume it would be for you as well, that it becomes increasingly more difficult to view someone as who they are. Instead, you begin to view them as just this jumble of cognitive functions, being aware of which ones they preference until you finally have that, what they call it on the website, a type code. And you'll realize that although each person is indeed unique on some very, very high resolution scale, on a core level, people do fall into patterns. At a core level, they do have a level of predictability that you can, in fact, exploit, which is a nice segue into perhaps a few tips, maybe some tricks, things to notice when it comes to influencing your relations with certain personality types. Some of the more practical information involves the types that are going to be most likely your boss or your supervisor. Understandably, those are going to be more introverted sensing preferenced peoples. ESTJs and ISTJs are going to be some of the more simple types to get in good with. There are some very objective steps that you can take to getting, let's say, an ESTJ to look upon you favorably, depending on your level of tolerance for tedious activities. For whether it's an ISTJ or an ESTJ, listening to their stories, following the rules, don't try to implement your own ideas on subjects. In the case of an ESTJ, though, you need to agree with whatever their thoughts are. They get very upset when their understandings of things are contradicted or confronted. ISFJs and ESFJs are a bit trickier to deal with. You have to be socially competent. You've got to be able to make them laugh, or at the very least, you do need to follow whatever their procedures are. The more they like you, the more you can get away with. If you do manage to get more personal with them, they'll start sharing more stories with you. More personal stories, of course, which lets you know that you are within this this circle, this social setting of theirs. And they'll want to make sure that you're taken care of in that work environment. And as before, these are what I call the normal personalities. I call them normal because these are the most frequent. These are the ones you're going to have the most experience with. They typically follow rules, traditions, procedures. They're often aware of what latest fashions are in place, what hip new trend is taking the country by storm, and put some measure of thought into adapting to whatever the new thing is, assuming they see enough of it, which I suspect is why we're finding more introverted sensing personalities get into MBTI or other typologies. It's becoming more popular, so it's time for them to get on board. The next types that are less frequent, extroverted sensing preferenced people. These types don't necessarily follow a tradition or a set of rules or procedures. They prefer to experience life as it comes to them. So they're going to be quite a bit more impulsive, certainly a bit more talkative. They often want to explore new ways in which they can be physical in an activity. They enjoy the great outdoors, going hiking or camping, bowling, ultimate frisbee nowadays. However, many of them still enjoy more Twitch-based video games, ESTPs and ISTPs, and really often enjoy engaging their reflexes to challenging their ability to react to new situations in a more physical manner. But you'll see the same in ESFPs, ISFPs. I've found that with extroverted sensors, it's often hit or miss when it comes to physical exercise. If they have a belief that being more physically fit is beneficial, perhaps it gets them more attention from the opposite sex or makes them feel better than everyone else, then they may in fact engage in that behavior. But if you take let's say an ESTP who's 6'2", has a great job and is male, of course, by this time they've already done well enough when it comes to getting people to like them, getting attention from whoever it is they want attention from, and is the case with extroverted sensing preferenced people. When you start getting into the more abstract topics, conversations that exist more as forms of thought, so things like philosophies, theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, or just simply imagining why others do what they do, their eyes tend to glaze over. They can only put up with the conversation for a set period of time. If you're dealing with an extroverted feeling type, if you're dealing with either an ESTP or ISTP, they often do their best to respect listening to the subject, but they are not, they're checking out. Whereas ESFPs or ISFPs may attempt to steer the conversation in another direction, something that they're more interested in or something they can better relate to. And even less frequent than that are the extroverted intuitive personalities. These are the types that often are considered weirdos in society. These are the kids that don't do well in school. Their minds are racked with possibilities, deducing possibilities, caring about their feelings, possible ways that they might feel in scenarios, wondering about how other people are feeling. With that extroverted intuition comes a desire for the perspectives of others as actual forms of abstract thought. So they tend to spend a lot more time listening than talking. They spend a great more deal of time inside their own minds, inside their own imaginations, than actually getting things done in the real world. In the case of, let's say, INTPs and INFPs, they have a slightly increased preference for introverted sensing. And so sometimes they can pick up some excellent cultural traits from their family or from the environment around them, which could come out as maybe a slightly better work ethic, following certain religions, doing as their parents believe they should be doing. But even that function in that position does not override their desire for the abstract and not living in the real world. So when you get to talk to them in more private settings, they tend to explode with all of these ideas that are oftentimes not even relevant to whatever the conversation might have been, losing more and more focus on reality and more in a land that does not exist, an imaginary world, always wanting to talk about hypotheticals or the theories that they have. Extroverted intuitives often want to be in careers that are not of the norm. And as I've said before, this world that we currently have, today's society and structure, wasn't exactly meant for extroverted intuitives. And so circumstances can influence what kinds of professions they do end up settling for. And in the case of certain personalities like the ENFP and the ENTP, once they get sick of a job, they're done with it. They just leave and then try to find something else that maybe gives them momentary or some kind of temporary excitement. Personally, I found that the jobs where I get to speak with people have been far more tolerable than the ones doing stocking or unloading trucks. Obviously, I'm not much of a physical labor kind of person. My ENFP father went through a number of varying potential careers, not ever really being satisfied with what he was doing until he created his own business, which, if it's possible, as a piece of advice, a recommendation, if you are a lead extroverted intuitive, that is what I would encourage if you have the ability to do so. Start your own company, start your own business. Do stuff that you want to do. Otherwise, you can hope that you get lucky, you get into a job where it's mostly creativity most of the time, and that you could be satisfied with that. Then on to the least frequent of all the types, and of course I'll explain why that even is. Introverted intuitives are by far the least likely of the personality types you're going to come across. And what makes this type so infrequent, they have a strong preference for ideas that are good for them, and they want to have them implemented. These are the people that don't stop working, and they don't stop moving forward towards whatever goal they've objectively decided was best for them. They're hyper-focused, hyper-driven individuals. They often want to forge their own path and do their own thing apart from what they grew up around. And it can be difficult to spot that introverted intuition at a first glance. They're often very conscientious, very responsible people, which could be said of a lot of introverted sensors that grew up in that particular environment. The difference being that they want to keep going further. They're not looking to take the minimal effort for maximum reward kind of approach. When they're younger, usually around high school, they have got this plan for their life, and you can see them executing that plan on a day-to-day basis, because for them, they cannot turn this off most of the time, especially in the case, of course, for lead introverted intuitives, INTJ and INFJ. They can't turn these things off. They're always living in their future, and they can't afford to take any missteps on the road there, as they don't want to lose it. So it's constant studying, constant homework, picking out the colleges they're going to be going to, what electives do they need to take to increase their chances of being accepted. They have very little time for fun activities because their goals and plans, ambitions come first. Introverted intuitives will absolutely go to college if it's necessary, if it's a part of that plan. They will get it done. They will find whatever career they want to get into, and they will continue working on it until they are forced to retire, because every time they take a day off, it simply means prolonging the trip, prolonging the journey to getting to the end. And human beings in general that behave like that are very, very rare. I don't know the exact number, but I want to say that in terms of preference, a first or second position introverted intuition, that's what, less than 6% of the United States population. It is a very rare individual who absolutely wants to go above and beyond and takes whatever measures are necessary to make it there. And I'd like to finish up this video, and these little tips and tricks, this is not information that I read from someplace. This is not information that I got a consensus on from a group of people. This is information that I went out there and found myself. It was from those years of seeing the extremes, seeing the patterns in human behavior that allowed me to correctly associate which functions with what behaviors, and to see which behaviors are associated with which function in which position. Many of the content creators you see today in regards to MBTI, they often don't understand the system. They simply read a lot of books, talked with a lot of people, and came to this general consensus, an amalgamation of information that exists as, of course, theory, but hasn't been adequately applied to real life. And so that's when you get a lot of ESTJs pretending to be ENTPs. In one particular case, I saw an ESFP telling people they were an INTJ. There's just a great deal of context that's missing when all you're doing is theorizing and then telling people it's true. You need to get off the computer and go out into the real world and talk to people. And once you find those extremes in cognitive function preference, you then start to get a better understanding of what functions in what positions. And unfortunately, most people are not willing to do that. They would rather live in the theory without actually needing to see if it works. And perhaps I do have a bit of a bias against it, given that I've had to spend my life being around other people, getting them to see things my way, a preference for making sure as many positive interactions could be had with that person, having a preference for manipulating people, once again, not in the negative way. I mean, if someone is sad, you try to manipulate them into feeling better, for example, of course, because you might need something from them later. And so for me, towards this over 10 years of MBTI, you see the same kinds of behaviors over and over again within the community. There are still people out there that believe that introverted sensing has nothing to do with memory, as an example. And yeah, it gets a little frustrating over the years. But if you take into account that people in the community are just doing the best they can with the information available, the understanding takes a lot of the sting out of it when someone tells me that extroverted feeling is someone who really cares about the feelings of other people. And I think that will be it for today's video. I hope everyone got lots of fun presents this year. Hopefully you didn't argue with family too much. I'll be reworking some of these skits so that they are more funny, more entertaining. I'm trying to focus more on the entertainment value of MBTI rather than the educational. With most people, as I've mentioned before, they're not going to be as interested in learning how MBTI works so much as wanting to believe that they are the type they wish to identify as, and then seeing something entertaining related to it. And so when I do any educational work, I'm probably just going to end up putting it on the Patreon, or I'll try and get the YouTube special access feature thing working. Start posting them on there so that no one has to go to Patreon. And yes, I hope to see you on Saturday for the live stream. My live streams have also been cut down until further notice to about 2 hours rather than the 4. And I think that'll be about it. And as always, I'll catch you later. Bye.